שבוע טוב, בוקר טוב. Our hero for today, the Rabbi of the week, is Rav Avraham Yeshayau Karelitz, much well known as the Chazon Ish. Ish, Aleph Yud Shin, is an acronym of his name, Avraham Yeshayau. And so that's the Chazon Ish. I have a feeling of a personal connection in a very, very far away way, but still, if my calculations are right, it had been in 1952. My father, Zichrono Levracha, was born in Romania in 1943 during the Holocaust in a bunker, hiding. And after the war, it took them some years. In the beginning, they believed they would be able to extract some of the assets. They still didn't understand what does it mean that the communists are taking over of the country. At around 1950, it was clear, and then they made Aliyah with nothing but basically the shirt on their back to Eretz Israel, and they were given a tent basically, in the Ma'abara of Bnei Brak, back then in Pardes Katz. And my father was 7, 8 years old, and he told me more than once, very fond memories of seeing the Chazon Ish walking in Bnei Brak, and at least once, maybe more than once, but I don't know, he told me the story a few times, so I'm not sure if it's the same story or a few stories. He was taken by his father, my grandfather, which I didn't have the chance to meet, to be given a blessing, to be given a bracha from the Chazon Ish. And according to my calculation, it was supposedly it was in 1952, a year before the passing of the Chazon Ish. Now, it's interesting to know that the Chazon Ish met with another important person in 1952, maybe not as important, but also important, that was Ben Gurion, the prime minister, and in many ways the founder of Medinat Israel. And I think this personality, which was open to every simple man, even if he just went down from a ship without having anything, and he was happy to meet everyone and speak with everyone and advise everyone, but also was able to meet with the highest political personas of the day, and all of that without having any official appointment. He was not Rosh Yeshiva. He was not the Rav of Bnei Brak. He was obviously not the Rav Arashi. I mean, he would be very offended if you would call him a Rav Arashi. So without any formal appointment to anything, he was still in many, many ways the most important, for sure in the Haredi world, the most important rabbi of his time. And in that capacity, he shaped Haredi society in larger circles, all of the Torah world for generations to come, and his influence is still very much felt to this day. So this is the person that I would like to speak about today. Just to understand, I hope to be able to finish it in an hour, but this is the biography of the Chazon Ish, written by Professor Binyamin Brown. Now that's in Hebrew, and it's about 1,000 pages. If you know, when you translate from Hebrew to English, it's usually about 30% longer. So we speak about, in English, it would take something like 1,300 pages. So the Chazon Ish is at least as important as Harry Potter, I would say. The Chazon Ish was born in Kosova, Lithuania, Eastern Lithuania. Nowadays it's part of Belaruсь. We spoke earlier about the Middle East and what is going on here, but obviously the Balkan is no less, I guess, a bag of surprises than the Middle East. So nowadays it's Belarus, and it's called the Kosovo. There is another name. They have it's slightly different. I apologize, I didn't write it to myself. If someone would want to visit, I don't think I recommend, but if someone would want to visit, then the name is slightly different nowadays. And his father was the Rav of the city, of the Rav of the town, and also both of his grandfathers were important, even very important rabbis. So he was one of 9 siblings. He had 4 brothers and 4 sisters, right? So that's 9, yes. So there were 5 brothers and 4 daughters, sisters. All the brothers became Rabbanim. 2 of them were murdered in the Holocaust, but all of the brothers became Rabbanim, and all of the daughters were married to Rabbanim. So that's the type of family we are thinking about. That's the elite, the creme de la creme of rabbinical Lithuania. His father, in the house of his family, according to the testimonies we have, there was a very strong dagesh, focus on, in English it would be purity, tahara, but it's not, I don't think it captures. They were stressing, for example, doing netilat yadayim, if you touched anything before you learn Torah. So always be very clean-minded, but obviously the outcome that they desired was not to be clean-handed only, but to have a very clean-cut mind. And also it was stressed, again, the Yiddish word would be idelkeit, that is gentleness. That was considered to be one of the highest virtues in the Lithuanian world. Maybe some of you are familiar with the word. He translated that in his later years as adinut. So that's the type of house he was growing at. His father didn't send him to the local cheder because he felt that in the local cheder maybe the company, the other boys were not necessarily of that same cleanest mindset. So he taught him at home, he himself, and also he hired a tutor. And it seems in a way that he was not considered the most genius, maybe, of the brothers or of the town. And it seems, again, this is speculation. I rely here on what Professor Brown writes, but I would give a notice, and that is that there are many books that were written on the Chazon Ish. Much of them are what we call hagiographies. So these are not biographies in the regular way of telling history, but these are books that are meant to extol and to present the greatness of the person that is being described. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean everything there is lies, but it also doesn't mean that everything there is necessarily true or only true. And it's very, very difficult to try and separate the hamotz mehateven, the good from, not from the bad, but from the what should fall aside of the chef, right? That's the word. So that's it's a very difficult work, and also many times just we are unable to know. It seems, and in many of the decisions, because I did not read half of a dozen of hagiographies, and I didn't interview the witnesses, etc. So in many aspects, I rely on Professor Brown's work, and I hope that we would not say anything that is too wrong. So it seems that he was considered not necessarily the brightest, not because his abilities, or he was obviously gifted from a very young age. No one can argue that, but he was focused on halacha and on pshat, the plain meaning, and on pkiut, meaning trying to extend his knowledge to the largest scope. And in Lithuania of the time, what was usually more appreciated is bright moves, explanations, kushiot v'teirutzim, asking questions, giving good answers, analytical skills. Now, we had excellent analytical skills, but not of the glimmering type. He was one of these people, of these men, and they are very rare, that are able to sit a day after day and learn things even if they are not of huge interest maybe, and there's nothing beautiful to say about them, but it's just the truth because it is true, and it is the word of God. so you have to understand it fully and wholly. And he would sit day after day, and it may be that when being asked to give a Dvar Torah, so you would not begin with a beautiful question and then end with a surprising answer. He was not this type of a drama man. But as he will tell, someone, he told it to one of his students called Shevet HaLevi, Reb Shmuel Vazner, just passed away about 10 or 15 years ago, maybe less. So he told him that in his youth, some of his friends would have fun at him, that he would be just, you know, a balabait, which in Lithuania many times, according in the elite, would be seen as an insult. You just become a working man, right? Because it seems that you don't have the mind for real deep learning. And he would say, look what had come out of me and what had come out of them. In 1891, he celebrates his bar mitzvah, and according to the stories, at that same day, he dedicated himself for Torah learning for the rest of his life. And that's an obligation that he didn't forsake even for one day. According to some of the stories, he tried to go to a yeshiva in Brisk, Reb Chaim of Brisk, or maybe his father. Again, it's unclear because it depends on the exact year, just before his bar mitzvah, just after his bar mitzvah. But he was intrigued by this new learning method that was developed in Brisk. However, all the stories agree at one thing, and that is that less than a week, and he was back home. Now, exactly why, that's a question that is very difficult to answer. And you know, to be honest, Baruch Hashem, you all had children. And so you know that it's very difficult to know why your 14 years old son is going somewhere or going back from anywhere, and what exactly does he tell you, and what he doesn't tell you. So I'm not surprised that we do not really know why did he come back. He himself seemingly didn't want to speak about it in his later years. Some of the reasons being given is, one of the reasons being given is that just he was homesick. Yeah, which can obviously be. Also, his family were makpid on chadash, so they wouldn't eat from the bread. I don't want to go into the fine details, but it's a certain kashrut stringency that usually in Europe most of the people were not makpid on, were not choshesh for, and so he didn't have what to eat, so he had to return. Now, in our days, someone can live without bread for a week. Without any problem, because you can, as they say, if you don't have bread, you can eat cakes. But back then, if you didn't eat bread, then you'd eat you'd eat your fish without bread, and that would be everything. So he just left and returned home. Others say that he was sick, not necessarily homesick or not just homesick, and that is something that can be somewhat supported. Many years later, please spread them. Yes, but it would be difficult to say that just after 1 week, at the age of 14 or 12, you decide. Everything can be. When we speak about this type of people, we need to readjust, to recalibrate our age meter. But still, I would imagine that you would stay for the end of the Zman. So many years later, you can see it in source Aleph. That's from his collection of letters. Kovetz Igot, we'd use it a lot during this shiur. And he writes, and that's as an apology, זה עתה הגיעני מכתבך הארוך. I just received your long letter. And מפני רפיון הבריאות, because my health is shaken, וייסורי הגוף התמידיים אצלי מנעוריי, and my suffering, my physical suffering, which are constant with me from my very young age. כל מה שאני מעיין הוא בהבלגה על האיסורים. It's amazing, right? So he says, everything that I'm trying to sit and learn, it's always I have to overcome my sufferings. ולא בכל שעה אני ראוי לעיין. Not in every hour I'm even able to sit and learn. Now again, in a part, it's an apology. Why didn't he answer earlier on this specific letter? But on the other hand, it does reveal that he was suffering from a very young age, and it sometimes stopped him from being able to learn as he wanted. So it may be that that was the reason he was suffering from problems throughout all of his life in his digestive system. He underwent a few operations on it. So that's also something that he's suffering from. So it's very easy to imagine when you combine all of these reasons, all of these elements. So he went there, he was homesick, he was limited in what he could eat. He was feeling very bad because anyhow he had a weak constitution, that's the word, and now he couldn't eat what he should have. So you can add all of this together, and maybe that would give you the right answer. And all of these obviously are all very far-fetched speculations. So he comes back home, and from now on, his learning would always be, you may say, independent. And that's fascinating, because he is the man which you can almost say single-handedly created the yeshiva and kollel society of the Brak and of the Haredi Israeli Haredi world as we know today, but he himself almost never learned in a formal institution. I think that's very interesting. He himself, so again, in a testimony where be given by Rav Sternbuch, he says in source ב' שמעתי על רבינו החזון איש זצ"ל שנשאל למה לומד יחידי. So people asked him, why do you learn by yourself? Chazal instruct us to always have a chavruta and to have more people to learn with, so why do you learn by yourself? והצביע על דברי רש"י ושאר המפרשים שהלומד בספרים איננו לומד ביחידי. He says, my companions are the rabbis written in the books. Which, so again, I think it's very telling about his personality. He was, you may say, he was lonely in a very deep sense throughout all of his life, but it's important to emphasize that all of the stories, they all reflect that while he was a lonely man, he was someone that it was very fun to be with. So he had a dry sense of humor in the best Lithuanian tradition. And he was a man of talking. He had no problem talking with people. Obviously, if they were wasting his time, then he would try to go back to his learning, which was what he loved to do. I read somewhere now, I can't remember where, but he wrote that up to 10 minutes in order to help someone speaking with, it shouldn't be considered bitul Torah yet. So that's an interesting. Obviously, he didn't set with a stopper, but that's the basic feeling. So that's he says, "Em raboteinu vegam chavereinu she'al yadam gdelim b'Torah." So the books and the rabbis the rabbis in the books are our rabbis. They are also our friends with whom we are being raised in Torah. So again, that's it's beautiful. I don't think it's fit for everyone. But obviously for him, it did wonders. They'd say that, so he would sit and learn, again, by himself, or maybe with one chavruta, with his older brother, they say that he would learn for hours. They say when they would get stuck in a sugya that he won't be able to decipher, then they would stop. They would go to the corner, each one would take a corner of the room, and they would cry and say Tehillim for the success of their learning. Which is, again, he was a man that was dedicating all of his kochot, all of his strength, all of his efforts to Torah learning for its own sake. For its own sake. So he's still young. We'll come to Parnasa in a few minutes. In a few minutes. Still with at home, yes. You're right, but it's not a formal institution. It's not a yeshiva. It's not a kollel. It's a different thing. He was not sitting in a desert. He's not a hermit, if that's the question. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good emphasis. In source Gimel, there is something that he wrote to himself. We are not sure about the year. in the Kovetz Igrot, in the collection of his letters, I don't know, they found it, I guess, in some diary of his, they say it's from his teen years. Okay. And that's what he writes to himself. אל תבלה נפשך ברעיונות ובחשבונות. Do not spend your life, I guess, or your soul, with ideas and with calculations, כי בזה יבולה עתותיך. It will just consume your time. כי שנותיך יתמו וחשבון לא תדע, רק ימים יכלו וחוכמה לא תקנה. He says, if you try to be too much orderly in how you buy your Torah, so you say, you learn this Masechet, this few months, and then that Masechet, says the time would just end with the calculations, and Torah you will not learn. יכן ידידי, he says to himself, so my friend, אל תעיין על העבר ואל תסדר עבודתך ליום אחרת. Do not begin to think about, calculate the past, and do not try to order yourself for the future. כי לא יעונה עצתך ותופר. Your advice would not be successful, it would just be void. רק למוד בעוד עתותיך בידיך. So just learn. When you have the time, sit down and learn. Don't try to make a whole program about how do you reach from one end of the Shas to the other end of the Shas. Just sit and learn carpe diem, right? And take the time as it is. Seize the day. Thank you. Seize the day. כי חיש מהר תעוף מאיתך ולא תשיגה ובר תישאר. על כל צעדיך תשמור ברעיונך. So everywhere you go, always hold in your mind, he says to himself, what you are learning. ורק בו תהגה, and only think about your learning material. וילדי נוכרים, and the children of the Gentiles. So it doesn't clear what exactly does he mean. He means here maybe math and other wisdoms, maybe just mean other ideas. It's very difficult to say. But the children of the Gentiles, תגרשם, expel them. לבלתי נתון להם רמוס חצרי לבך. They shouldn't walk upon the streets of your heart. וברח מהם כמתח חבי קשת. You should run away from them. כי המה יבהלו כל אשתנותיך, כי לא ישירו בך רוח בינה וימיך יבוא. So if you begin to think about them, so again, it's very difficult to know what does he mean by them, the children of the Gentiles. But I think it's fair to assume that he speaks here about what you would call today secular knowledge. So he says that would just, again, spend your time. So just think about Torah. ורק בכל אשר תבחר לך למלא את ידיך, בוא תדבק בכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. You should cling to the Torah with all of your might and strength. אל תעזבמה אף לרגע. Do not abandon it even for a minute. כי אם תעזבהו יום, for if you abandon it for a day, יומיים יעזבך. So how many of us would be able to write such a thing at the age of 15 or 16? So obviously he's a very strong-minded young man, young person, and he has what to show for this determination. Yeah, that's the original. He was writing in what seems to be, I would be provocative now, but almost I would say modern Hebrew. It's not modern. And obviously he was more impacted by what he learned Hebrew in Torah books. Especially, maybe again, all of these are speculations. Some of them, Brown is going length and width to understand what he did learn, what he did not, according to the language he's using. That's part of what researchers are doing. Analyze the vocabulary in order to understand what books he was reading. But in the end, it's very difficult to know. That's the real answer. He read more in Nevuchim and this type of Hebrew thought literature, although he didn't interact with it too much later in his life. Also, it's clear that he read some of the modern Hebrew periodicals that were printed at the time. This is, if the names are known, HaPeles and HaTzfira. These were a Hebrew newspaper of yesterday century. So he took some of the Hebrew from there. That's what we can say. More than that, it's very, very difficult to know. In 1906, he is already 27. So it's time to get married. In Lithuania, it was the custom in many places to be married a little later than in the rest of Europe. in other areas, especially in the more Hasidic areas, 26, 27, you are very old, you're out of the market. But in Lithuania, it was not something that was so unusual. And we have to remember that it's not necessarily an easy shidduch, because while he is a genius, he's not yet recognized as one, because as I said, he's focusing on something that is very different from the rest of his environment, so not necessarily appreciated, and he has health issues, and his family is not rich. So, yeah, maybe that's number one. Yes. In the end, he's being given a shidduch, and as the minhag was back then, you would agree to the shidduch before meeting the girl. But that happened many times because people are living in faraway villages. So if you were able to find someone from your own village or from hometown, then that's good and nice. But if it's someone from far away, then it would be a shadchan or shadchanit, and they will come, and they will be the messengers between the two families, and everything is fine and happy. Then they would sign the t'naim and would go to visit the mechutanim. So the Chazon Ish was promised by his future father-in-law mountains and hills. I don't know if there is in English such an expression. Harim ve'gvaot. That he would be financed, that he'd be able to sit and land. That's the only thing. And Chazon Ish made it very clear that he is not going to work. He's unable because of his health, and he wants to sit and land. So he needs someone that will be able to finance him. He said it at least up front. And the father-in-law says, I am happy. I guess that some of us, maybe that are a little less naive, would say a father-in-law that is happy to such an agreement, we need to check what is going on. So they are signing this agreement at Naim, and now Chazon Ish and his parents are going to see the Kala and their parents. And when they come there, two things are immediately clear. A, that the Kala is about 6 or 7 years older, or maybe 10 years older than the Chazon Ish. And if he is 27, you would make the calculations, and you see that she's almost after the age of bearing children. And you have to remember, that's before all of the trips and everything that we have nowadays. And B, the father-in-law would not be able to, maybe he wants to give everything that he has promised. No one, chas v'chayla, is blaming him for not wanting to uphold his word, but he won't be able to because he doesn't have the money. So the mother of the Chazon Ish said, you need to go back from the shidduch because I don't want to say that they cheated us, but misrepresented. Rachel bitcha aktana, exactly. And the Chazon Ish decides against the will of his mother. The will of his father, for some reason, is not being mentioned in the Sfarim. So maybe the mother was the one to make decisions in this type of situations. You agree, I see. Okay. So he went against his mother, and he decided that in order not to shame, her name was Batya. That was the Hebrew name, but she was known as Basha. So in order not to shame her, he would take on the marriage. And many years later, he was asked in a letter by a person that a very similar thing was happening to him. And his father-in-law would not be able to sustain him, etc. And he wrote a letter to the Chazon Ish, should he cancel the shidduch? And the Chazon Ish wrote to him that there is a certain Rema in the Shulchan Aruch saying that one should not cancel a shidduch because of monetary issues, but should have faith in God. And he writes, and I myself have usually relied on this Rema. So that's, I think that's very, for me, this is very, very moving. However, he was more bothered by the question of having children. As we'll see later, he was a very children-loving person, and he wanted a big family. Uh, However, a big family, it was almost clear that he is not going to have. Unfortunately, she had one miscarriage, and apart from that, she was never able to get pregnant again. 20 years later, I'm now skipping a little ahead in times, according to what we have in the Sfarim that tells about him. So he was trying to see if she would agree, because according to halacha, after 10 years without children, then the husband is allowed, or maybe even obligated, as discussed in the halachic rulings, to divorce his wife and to get a wife that would be able to fulfill the mitzvah of Purvu. So after 20 years later, he tried to speak with her to see if that's something that she would accept. And she told him that she would accept the get, but throw herself to the river when going out of the Beis Din. And he never mentioned it again. And he did, as we speak about that later, but he didn't have children to the end of his life. That's again, it's not a simple story. However, it should be said that she took upon herself, because her father, I mean his father-in-law, was not able to financially support them, so she took upon herself to sustain the family. She opened a clothes store, not clothes, it's a badim, fabric. A fabric. I think it was a common practice among the Jews in Eastern Europe. So she opened a store, and she was the complete manager of all the monetary issues. They say that when he needed money to buy a sefer, he needed to go to her and ask for money. She was the boss, and he was happy with that. He saw that the next about 6 years in which he lived near his parents-in-law and she was running the store, he saw that as the golden age of his life. He was able to sit and learn 20 hours a day. No one interrupted. No one bothered him. She was taking care of all of everything that is practical. And he was asked a few times to give shiurim. He gave a few shiurim, but he didn't want any formal position, and he would cling to this decision of his not to take upon himself any mentor to the end of his life. So he was a very private person. He didn't carry any formal weight, any formal authority. If you heeded to his advice, it was only because you appreciated his greatness. And that is something that he would shape, I may say, the Haredi leadership after him. That you are not becoming a leader because you are a political leader, even not because you are Rosh Yeshiva per se. You can be a Rosh Yeshiva, it doesn't hurt. But it's not being Rosh Yeshiva what makes you a Gadol. It's not being a Rav of a shul or of a community or of a city or of a Chassidut. In that, we speak about the Lithuanian world. But that doesn't what make you a Gadol. It's only the private Torah, personal Torah greatness, and your ability to extend this influence into others, which is a beautiful thing. It carries its own problems as everything in life, but it's a beautiful thing. So that's from 1906 to 1914. He lived there in a place called Kweidan. I hope that I pronounce it correctly. That's the city of his parents-in-law. In 1911, he published his first book, his first sefer called Chazon Ish, without his name. He was not interested in publishing his name. As I said, the word Ish contains within it his name, Avraham Yeshayau. But still many people that in his own city, people knew that he was the one that published the sefer. But in every other place, people enjoy the sefer. He became a gadol, but by the name of the Chazon Ish. No one knew who is this young avrech sitting and learning, Avraham Yeshayau. He didn't earn a penny from the selling of the Sfarim because all of the income was dedicated to his father's yeshiva in Kosovo. He was not interested in earning any money from the selling of the Sfarim. Now, the Sefer is extremely difficult. And dare I say, that you remember that 2 weeks ago we spoke about Rabbi Hanan Wasserman, who was about being a Rosh Yeshiva. So he was writing, and for the young girls. So he was writing, if you remember, I told you that that's one of the most easy to understand and clearly written books. And it's very interesting. Here we see someone that really was not part of the yeshiva world and was not teaching regularly. So maybe he was less focused on being understandable. He was focused on writing short and to the point, and he just assumes that you already learned everything before. So he's not going to give you anything with a spoon. You must learn the sugya very well with all of the mefarshim, and then you may go and go into the Kodesh, go into the Chazon Ish, and try to understand. Nowadays, they are publishing from time to time commentary on the Chazon Ish, so you can buy the Chazon Ish explained, because it's so difficult to learn. But on the other hand, it's so rewarding. People do want to learn, but it's very, very difficult. Also, as I said earlier, is not interested in only in the fundamentals of the sugya, only what is interesting. He is interested in everything. For him, everything is fair game. So it may be the smallest details or the most important chilukim. He would deal with what he deems as part of the Torah. And that's also why, throughout the years, he is one of the only sages during the generations that wrote almost about all of the Torah, from questions of orach chaim, of tefillah, the smallest questions of tefillah, to the most intricate and complicated sugiyot of tahara or of korbanot. There was nowhere that he didn't shed his light with great genius and also originality, because he very rarely is quoting from the sages of the earlier of his generations. Also, obviously, it's Mishnah, Gemara, and some of the Rishonim, and not much else. In 1914, First World War breaks, and he is with his wife. He runs away to Stoivich. Now there, for the only time of his life, it's unclear, that the Rav of the city also had to run away and asked him to serve as the Rav, and forced him, more or less. So again, he refused to take any pay, and he refused to be given any title or to sit in the Mizrach or anything like that, but he did agree that people with Shailot would come to him and ask their Shailot. But that's only for a very few years, and then he found the son of the Shochet. He made him into the Rav instead of him, which was, I only have mercy on this son of the Shochet, which may have been a great Rav, I don't know, but when you have in your shul the Chazon Ish, I am not sure what exactly are you doing. But that's he didn't want to be the Rav. I'm skipping ahead because of time. 1920, he goes to Vilna. He moves to Vilna, and there he becomes close associate with Reb Chaim Oizer Gushinsky, about who we spoke a few months ago, a very important rabbi, a very important leader, very different from the Chazon Ish. He's very public, a very known figure. And Reb Chaim Oizer sees that the Chazon Ish is not only a genius in Torah, but also has a very practical, keen sense. And you can speak with him about, I don't want to say, it's not politics in the low sense, the higher sense of the politeia, of managing the Jewish nation. And he's beginning to ask for the advices of this young Chazon Ish. So we speak about Reb Chaim Ozer Gushinsky, the sage, the elder, the Gadol Ador, speaking with this. He's not 20 years old anymore, he's 40 years old, but yet he's a young man considering. And he becomes the advisor, we may say, of Reb Chaim Ozer. But still, he is not publicly known. Reb Chaim Ozer is sending people to ask him questions, and he introduces him to important other rabbis, but still, if you'd ask just the simple Jew in the street, then he would not know who are we speaking about. In 1923, still in Vilna, he publishes the second part of the Chazon Ish, which is on אורח חיים, including an important notebook, קונטרס המוקצה, on, again, very small details of halacha. But he is able to work almost about everything, from the smallest detail to the very highest and complex matter. However, it seems that there is a toll on his health because he had, as we said, a problematic health from his youth, and he's learning 20 hours a day, and he's not eating in an ordered way. So it's in the end, he pays the price, and it seems that he had some type of so again, it's very difficult to say a mental breakdown or a physical breakdown or somewhat intertwined. He was told by the doctors that he's not allowed to learn in depth for almost a year. So for almost he accepted the advice of not the advice, the order of the doctors, because that's pikuach nefesh. That's what halacha says, that you need to listen to the doctors. So he is the halachic man. He's listening to the doctors. So he's not learning in depth for almost a year. Later he would say that he just walked in the streets and felt that he's going out of his mind. You can only imagine for someone like him being distant from Torah, it's a suffering, unimaginable suffering. After that, when he returns, he's doing something very interesting. When he returns to learn, he begins to take young chavrutot, young men in their teen years, usually guys that are, we'd say today, youth at risk. So guys that are maybe problematic, that have thoughts about leaving faith, etc. And it seems that he's trying to, again, I'm now speculating and I apologize, but I cannot run away from the thought that he's trying to compensate for his lack of own children. And so throughout all of his life, he would be trying to assist and to help not young 6, 7, but 16, 17, 20-year-old boys, helping them to find a way, usually back into Torah. Now that is extremely interesting because, when you deal with your out-of-the-mill guys, then you have a very high ratio of success. When you deal to begin with the borderline, then you'd have also cases of failure. He didn't shy away from, sometimes he was able to influence them to go back to Torah. Many times he did not. That gave us some of the most interesting descriptions about the Chazon Ish, because one very famous person that learned with the Chazon Ish as a young man was a person named Chaim Grada. Chaim Grada went on, he became unreligious, but he went on and became one of the most popular Yiddish writers of the time, publishing a few sefarim in which he describes the Chazon Ish, disguised in the name instead of Chazon Ish, he called him Machazeh Avraham. Machazeh is Chazon, Ish is Avraham, Yeshayau. So but it's very, very clear, there's no question, that he speaks about the Chazon Ish, and he gives us a beautiful glance into the life of the Chazon Ish and also other important rabbis of the time. So if you want, then I don't know the Yiddish, and I think some of them were translated into English, but again, I didn't check before the shiur. In Hebrew, these are called the Tzemach Atlas series. And if you want to read a very rich and thick description of life in Europe between the wars, that's a beautiful source to see. I don't think that he wrote in English, but maybe it was translated. Yeah, he used to be a very well-known Yiddish writer. I'm looking here and I see that the name does not ring a bell, but he used to be very famous. So I really recommend, if you have some free, I'm sure that all of you have made a lot of free time. So if you do have, and there are worse things that you can do than read Chaim Grada's Sfarim. If you can read the Chazon Ish himself, that's beautiful. But let's say that you want to relax a little from reading the Chazon Ish, then you can read Chaim Grada. Okay. He begins to consider making Aliyah in 1923, and it would take him 10 years before he could make Aliyah. But you have a very interesting letter that he wrote in 1923. You can look here at source A. על דבר ארצנו הקדושה, regarding our holy land, רצוני לדעת, that's a letter that he sends to a relative of his that already made עלייה. I want to know אם ניכר אצלכם תחיית הארץ. Is it really apparent that the land is reviving? ובניין הריסותיה בימים האחרונים כהערה חדשה, is there really, he says, a sense of renewal, of rebuilding? כי אנחנו מרחוק קשה לנו לכונן בליבנו מושג נאמן. Here from afar it's difficult for us to really know what is going on. So obviously, look, in 1923, it was very obvious that there is a revival going on. But we have to remember that he is also asking himself about what is how a religious life going on, because the revival is being led by people that are very far from being his cup of tea. Right? You remember that his father didn't send him to the local cheder because not all of the guys there was of the right company. So the question of is the land being built in the right way, that's a big question. And he says, על דבר עלייתנו, regarding our עלייה, כפי דברי המאיץ דקה שובה בפתחי תשובה, איני זוכר אתה מקומות. It's beautiful. I couldn't resist bringing it on. So he writes a letter, and he is a genius. But he has no problem writing. I don't remember right now exactly where did I see it. Now, to be honest, I will be ashamed to write such a thing. So I would check and recheck and make sure, because, you know, a Rav writing something, so I don't remember where it is. But only when you have a lack of confidence, obviously you need to do that. If you're the Chazon Ish, then you just say, right now I don't remember, and it's not so important for me to waste time because I have more important things to do right now. So it says, there is, but more interesting is the content. It says, what does the mail tzedakah write? החיוב דווקא, החיוב לעלות, it means. So the obligation to make עלייה, דווקא אם מוצא שמה להתפרנס. Only if you can make a living. Now, that's so interesting for me. So here is someone that has zero interest in the practical world. Right? His wife is doing all of the work. He does nothing. He knows nothing. He doesn't know the shape of a coin, as we say. But on the other hand, he says the obligation of making aliyah is only if you can live out of the land. If you are making aliyah just to live out of tzedakah, then that's not called chayim be'eretz Israel. So that's almost, it's very far from being Zionist. But that's almost Zionist, right? And he says, so I need to know if would be able to make our living there. ובזה אני צריך לדעת אם אפשר הדבר על ידי חנות manufacture. So he says, I need to know if we can make a living from a store of linings, right? Of clothes, not clothes, as he said, of fabric. Why? כי במלאכה אחרת אינה רגילה. So my wife doesn't know to do anything else. So we need to be able to make a living out of a fabric store. ואני איני מסוגל לעבודה כידוע, as it is well known, I am unable to work, as I said, because of his health conditions, and also because of his desire to dedicate himself to Torah learning. וכמה צריך לזה, ואם מוצאים הקפה, so I need to know if that's something that we can open. What is the budget? כמה צריך לזה? What is the budget we need in order to open such a store? So he is a practical, you see that he has this practical sense. ואם מוצאים הקפה, can I find credit? באיזה מקום בארצנו איני מוצא כפי, this is I don't care where. in ארץ ישראל, כי כל הארץ מקודשת, all of the land is holy. Now, some of us that may think that we are smarter than the Chazon Ish would say, no, Yerushalayim is holier than the rest of the city. It's a מפורשת Mishnah in Masechet Kelim, that there are 10 קדושות, and Yerushalayim has more קדושה than Eretz Israel. He knew this Mishnah no less than anyone sitting around this table. So I would guess, I would not go right now into the halachic masau matan, but what I guess is that if you understood that the mitzvah to make aliyah has to do with, not with the kedusha per se of Beit HaMikdash, but with the kedusha of walking the land, the kedusha ha'aretz, that in that sense there is no difference between Yerushalayim and the rest of the land. More broadly speaking, it also may be that he didn't want to live in Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim, the religious communities of Yerushalayim were part of the Yishuv Yashan. I think he didn't find himself there. You can understand. Someone that says, I want to make a living, that's very different from what is going on in Yerushalayim, where their banner is, we live from the Chalukah, from the money of the tzedakah coming in from Chutz La'aretz, because we are learning Torah for the whole of the nation. So these are very different sensibilities, and he was not, I don't think that he would have found his place in Yerushalayim. So it took another 10 years in which he sits in Vilna, again being introduced into Jewish also political life by Chaim Oizer, etc., etc. And in 1933, he is making Aliyah. The final reason for him to make the Aliyah was that one night he and his wife were asleep, and suddenly they heard noise. The store was it was a 2-room apartment. One room was the store, and one room was their living quarters. So one night they are being awakened by loud noises from the store. And his wife tells him someone is there stealing. And the Chazon says it is too dangerous to try and stop them. It may be then we may be murdered if we try to stop them. So they do nothing. And in the morning, when they walk in, they see that nothing is left. So basically, there is no reason anymore to stay in Vilna, and that's and then they decide that time is proper, time is right to make Aliyah. He's not a young man so much anymore. So if he was born in 1878, so in 1933, you would make a quick calculation. 55. Yeah. So it's not old, but he's not a young man, and finding work, beginning life anew, is not so easy already in that age. They do try, they make Aliyah, and very quickly he decides to make his residence in Bnei Brak. Nowadays it would clear, of course, a Haredi rabbi comes, why not to make his residence in Bnei Brak? But that was not necessarily what was going on back then. And I guess that many people believe that he would go and live in Yerushalayim or in Petach Tikva. But not in the Brak. It was just a very new place. There was Datim Sham, but not necessarily his type. But he decided that he would make Bnei Brak his place. And also he decided that now he would not take any official role, but he would be part of the shaping of Bnei Brak and later of the Orthodox, of the Haredi world in Eretz Israel. His wife began to try to settle up this.
She's 10 years older.
That's right. That's right. So she's trying to set up again the store, but maybe because of that reason, maybe because of other reasons, it fails. And they get into a large debt. They hardly are able to extract themselves from this problem. And from there on, they would make their living from him selling the books. And not from her. She would not work anymore. But the problem was he was not willing to accept. People wanted to support him because they lived in great poverty. So people wanted to support him by buying maybe more of the price. He was not willing to take more of the price of the sefer. So they say, I would buy 20 copies. He said, you don't need more than one copy. He would not sell. So Rav Kook was the Rav Rashi of the time. He would send people to him that didn't need the book just to sell. So, but you needed to be a unique person every time in order for him to sell you the sefer. But they wanted to support him. So that's there are many interesting stories. It seems that the health of his wife was deteriorating, and she was not able anymore. Not only that she couldn't run the store, she was not able to run the home anymore. And his sister Miriam, which married a certain, some of you may have heard about him, Rav Israel Kanievsky. Rav Israel Yaakov Kanievsky is the father of Rav Chaim Kanievsky, who was very known, Niftar just lately. And himself was called the Stipler. He's better known as the Stipler, a very well-known Gadol. So he was the brother-in-law of the Chazon Ish, and they came to live in the same house. So Miriam was now taking care of the whole household. Also, they brought with them. So everything is before, Baruch Hashem, before the war, that they were able to extract themselves. Also, they brought the Chazon Ish mother, that was still, his father was niftar many years before, but his mother was still alive, so they also brought her there. So they made a nice chamula in Bnei Brak. Reb Chaim Oizer, living in Vilna, gets many questions from Eretz Israel. From there on, every question he would receive, he would say, please go and ask the Chazon Ish. He is your go-to address for halachic questions. Now, they begin to go to the Chazon Ish, and here there are certain tensions that begin to rise. However, our time here is done. So I would say that you would call that a day. That would be the first part. It would be about the Chazon Ish in Europe. And Be'ezrat Hashem, next week, we'll speak about the use of the Chazon Ish in Eretz Israel. There is a lot to speak about. So I'm looking forward to seeing you. כל טוב, שבוע טוב.
תודה רבה. Thank you very much. תודה, תודה. שבוע טוב.